For us, it's a great pleasure and a really great honor to have a man with us who formed the car company, a young car company. It's just 2 years old. It sold last year 5.8 million cars. So 2 years old and 5.8 million cars. They had an operating income of 20 billion euros last year. 2 years, 20 billion turnover. They have a lot of cars in the volume segment. The volume segment is a very tough competition. You need scales and all these things. And they earned an operating margin in the volume segment of 11%. Can you imagine that? And I think there's a big story behind that. And we are very proud to have Mr. Carlos Tavares, the CEO of Stellantis, with us. He formed that company. He made the 11% turnover rate. And I think today we hear much on that, what the mystique behind that. Welcome, Carlos.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. So let's hear to him. It's important.
Well, thank you, Professor, and good morning to all of you. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you today, and it is my privilege to share with you a few thoughts about our industry, perhaps more importantly about our society trends, and of course any controversial statement I would make to keep you interested in this presentation is made on purpose, of course. So please bear with us. I would like to start by talking to you about anything else than cars. And I would like to start with the freedom of mobility. Of course, we want to make sure that the mobility devices that we offer to our citizens are safe, clean, and affordable. I think that the automotive industry is fully recognizing that our mission is indeed to offer our citizens clean, safe, and affordable mobility. I don't think there is any more discussion on that topic. I think everybody supports and everybody recognizes that. But more importantly, what is behind this mission is the fact that we realized through a specific initiative that we took this year called the Freedom Forum for Mobility, or the Forum for Freedom of Mobility, we discovered that there are now growing political forces that are fighting against individual freedom of mobility. And I don't know if you have noticed that, but we did. And if you want to check it, go and look at the video of our Forum for Freedom of Mobility, and you will see the evidence of what I am telling you. You have now emerging political forces that are fighting against individual freedom of mobility. And what do I mean by individual freedom of mobility? I mean your mobility with your kids, with your family. The mobility that you decide without any planning, without any pre-notice, without any authorization on Saturday morning when you are under the shower. I'm talking about that mobility. Spontaneous, decided on the spot for yourself, for your spouse, for your kids, for your friends. So you have right now in the Western world, and specifically in Europe, emerging political forces that are fighting against individual freedom of mobility. If you don't take my word for it, please have a look at the video of the Forum for Freedom of Mobility. There is a specific part of that video where you will see me very quiet, just listening to a very outspoken person that is indeed phrasing very clearly that we should not allow the citizens to decide by themselves where they want to go and when they want to go, if that means that they are going to use their personal mobility device. So you see, we are not talking about cars here. We are talking about a vision of the society. We are talking about a certain way of deciding what the lifestyle of our kids and grandkids should be beyond what they think. There is a specific word for this that I will not pronounce here for the sake of not hurting you. But I just would like to state that freedom of mobility is a basic need, a basic right for modern societies, not to say for modern democracies. And I do not believe that modern democracies can exist in a stable way without freedom of mobility. This is to say that, yes, of course, nobody is challenging the fact that the automotive industry needs to be clean, safe, and affordable. But if we project ourselves to the point where this is going to be a reality in a couple of years, it does not mean that we are out of the woods. Because the real battle out there is not about clean cars. The real battle out there is about a certain vision of the lifestyle that the Western world should have in the mind of a few people. So I don't want to get it wrong. I'm going to talk to you about cars because that's what you expect from me. But what I want to tell you this morning, very simply, is that decarbonization of the mobility devices is an instrument in the hands of people who want to dictate to us and to you a certain lifestyle that we did not discuss. And that means a political vision for the societies. That means the way we see how our Western society should be in a couple of decades. And that should not be decided by regulations. That should not be decided by social media. That should not be decided by NGOs. That should be decided in voting by the citizens based on proposals that would be made by political parties that would offer us a certain vision of what our lifestyle should be. And that's the big story. That is what is at stake. What is at stake is not clean mobility. What is at stake is freedom of mobility and a certain vision of what our lifestyle should be over the next decades. So let's go back to cars, because that's what we're interested about. If we go back to cars, we do recognize that global warming is a global problem. So wherever we are, we need to contribute as hard as we can to fix it. No discussion. Let's get the job done. And it is quite clear that achieving that, fixing the global warming, will not be done only through the fact that we are proposing a clean mobility. It has a lot to do with the behaviors of the citizens, because more than 50% of the CO2 emissions are created by human activity and by the decisions that consumers are making. So the behavior of the consumers needs to be part of the solution. Not only the mobility devices that we are offering to the market. Their whole behavior needs to be part of the solution, which means, again, back to lifestyle and back to the decisions that we would make as a society on the way we would like to live in 1 or 2 decades on this planet. Which means the behavioral part of the global warming fix is as important as the tools that we are using to go on a daily life. One of them being, of course, the automobile. So in these emissions that are driven by 55% by consumer decisions, our industry represents 17%, 17% of the global emissions. So we have a significant role to play to contribute to fixing the global warming issue. But we should also say that if it's a purely top-down driven fix, we will not get the job done if we don't get the consent of the people so that their behavioral change is going to add to the fact that the tools we are providing to the society will be more efficient with a lower carbon footprint. So we need to add the behavioral change to the improvement of the tools that we are using for our daily life, which then means that if there is no consent about the vision destination of the society that we would like to live in, it means that we will fail. It means that we will fail. And if we are only opposing part of the society to another, eventually smaller part that wants to dictate the fact that you can only survive if you reduce your freedom of mobility, that friction in the society will not lead to the behavioral change in magnitude that we need to add to the technology improvements to fix the global warming problem. It's time that we recognize that this is a lifestyle discussion and debate. And it is not something that can be put aside from the public debate, from the political discussions, and the political proposals of the societies that we would like to support. So for me, that's absolutely fundamental. From there, at Stellantis, we are absolutely committed to a sustainable mobility, and more than that, we have already committed, i.e., I have already committed to my grandchildren, I am a grandfather of 4, that my company would be carbon neutral by 2038. This is my commitment to my grandkids. It is not because I have activists in my shareholder meetings. It is not because one NGO is pushing on my back. It is not because I have a regulation. It's because I committed to my grandkids, period. So we will be, Stellantis, a carbon neutral corporation, Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, by 2038. To the best of my knowledge, we are the first ones to be, as soon as that, carbon neutral. And I would like to ask you a question. Is there a country in the world, is there any country in the world, any society in the world, that is going to be carbon neutral by 2038? No. There is no country in the world that is going to be carbon neutral by 2038. Stellantis will be. When I'm talking to the heads of state, I often tell them, respectfully, of course, say, Mr. President, if you were to ask to your citizens in your country 10% of what I am asking to my people at Stellantis, 10%, there will be a revolution in the streets. 10%, not more. Just ask 10% of what I am asking my people in my industry in terms of magnitude of change in a certain time window. Ask 10% of that to your people, and you'll get the revolution in the streets. So please, respect. Respect to the automotive industry employees and leadership teams. What you are doing is very difficult. We are doing it. It's painful. You have not seen much of the consequences of this transformation. It's now going to unfold in front of you, so be prepared. We are not going to add a layer of a new world on top of an old world. This is not sustainable from an economic standpoint, and it's not manageable from a diversity complexity standpoint. So yes, the transformation is not an addition. The transformation is a transformation. We stop doing this, we start doing this. So don't be surprised when the industry will say we stop doing this, is because you ask us to become this. And we cannot do both at the same time. And certainly not in a world with a 5% interest rate. So be ready. Be ready for the transformation. We have committed, and we are spending 30 billion euros up to 2025. In 5 years, we are going to spend 30 billion euros of investment for this transformation. We will be ready to sell 100% BEVs in Europe by 2030 and 50% of BEVs in the US by 2030. We will have the capacities, we'll have the models, we'll have the technology. We are ready. And I will demonstrate to you later on that we will be the only ones to be ready. That is going to create a big problem for the Western societies. By the end of next year, I will have 47 BEV models on sale, 47. My total model portfolio is 90-something, which means by next year, half of my model portfolio on my 14 brands will be BEV-based. So nobody can challenge us on the fact that we are executing the plan. We are doing it. By the way, if I take 2019 as a reference, because the NGOs are using 2019 as a reference point, by the end of 22, the total carbon emission reductions of Stellantis against 2019 was minus 30%. Do you have any country in the world that has done minus 30% against 2019? So you see, stop shooting the pianist. Stop doing that. So we are in the move, and as you know, as I said, we'll be carbon neutral by 2038, and no other state in the world will be doing that until then. Let me give you a few examples, concrete examples of what it means in Germany. In Roshersheim, in the Roshersheim plant, we have started to manufacture the pure BEV brand new Astra, award-winning Astra. After we produced the PHEV one, now we are starting the pure BEV one. In Eisenach, we'll build from next year the Opel Grandland pure BEV product based on the Stella medium platform. That's next year. In Kaiserslautern, we will build a gigafactory that will start in 2025 with 40 gigawatt hours. And this month, we will inaugurate our first gigafactory in Douvrin, France. And by 2025, we'll have a very powerful geothermal project also in Roshersheim. So you see, we are doing very concrete stuff. We are people that like to execute projects. We are project managers. We've set up our goals, we deploy across the company, then we break down in projects and we execute. We are about doing things. We are not so much about talking about them, but we are about doing them. So let's go and look at the ecosystem. If by chance I was able to convince you that Stellantis is on the move, that Stellantis is sincere, that I'm working for my grandkids, if I was happily able to convince you, I would like to demonstrate to you that we cannot succeed alone. I already explained to you that without consent from the people to change their behaviors, the tools alone will not make it. There must be a new vision for the society. And the new vision for the society cannot be only about restricting your freedom of movement, because that will not work. Should I talk to you about the yellow jackets in France? No, I don't need to do that, right? So if we are doing this just because somebody thinks that we should restrict your freedom of mobility, forget it, it's going to fail. We need a vision for the society. What does it mean to be living in a happy, carbon-free society in 10 or 20 years? Who is proposing that vision in a positive way? And you can count on us, we'll bring the tools. It's not going to be enough. By the way, 17% emission, if we fix it, is not going to fix the whole problem, is it? So we need to talk about the other part of the problem, which is mostly about energy. The virtuous circle, clean energy to charge clean cars, is not in place. So what does it mean to bring zero-emission vehicles from tank to wheel if the rest of the life cycle analysis is not consistent? In 2021, not a long time ago, 1/3 of Europe's energy was coming from burning gas. In 2021, 76% of the energy that we were using in Europe was fossil fuel-based, gas, oil, and coal, 76%. So it's quite clear that the clean energy rise needs to be stronger than just bringing new EVs to the market. Because if we don't put clean energy in zero-emission vehicles, then the mobility is not clean. Then we don't fix it. So, needless to say that the number one challenge is energy. It's not cars. And the problem is not about cars, the problem is about lifestyle. So, freedom of mobility and lifestyle is up there. Then we have 17% of emissions that we are fixing with zero-emission mobility tools from tank to wheel. But that is not going to work if you connect with 76% of fossil fuel-based energy. So the energy transformation needs to be running ahead of us. And that's exactly the problem. That's exactly the problem, is that the speed at which we are growing the clean energy supply needs to double over the next few years against what has been done over the last 3 years. It has to be growing at a rate of 12% between 2022 and 2030, and it was growing at 6% between 2019 and 2021. So the pace at which we are growing the clean energy supply is half of what it should be. Which means we didn't embrace the problem in the right way. No news. But now it's becoming quite visible. So it is quite clear that if we look at it stepping back a little bit, if we want to move from 80% energy, fossil fuel-based, to 80% of clean energy, you can look at it from different angles using different publications. It's a 20-year lead time, at least 20 years lead time. And if we don't fix that one, everything else can be electric vehicles, can be hydrogen, can be plenty of different electrification directions. If you don't have clean energy, forget it. It is not going to move. So 2 major things. If you don't have a behavioral change that is based on the consent from the people of a vision for a happy decarbonized society, forget it. If you don't have clean energy, you may have the zero-emission mobility tools, forget it. It's not going to work. So it's important that we understand that. If we assume that that work on clean energy is going to be executed within this 20-year time frame, then the next big question is how you set up the infrastructure for the infrastructure to support the convenience of usage of those mobility devices. Perhaps I'm a romantic cost killer. I still think that the ultimate decision is in the hands of the consumers. They will decide. And they will only decide if they see convenience through the density of the charging network. Can be charging of electricity, charging of hydrogen, you name it. How many years do you need to set up a charging infrastructure when you start from scratch? No less than 10 years. So 20 years for the energy, 10 years for the infrastructure. How many years do we need, the car makers, to make electric vehicles? 5 years. So 20 years, energy, 10 years, infrastructure, 5 years, electric vehicles. For anybody that has some good sense, you will immediately understand that we should start with energy, then infrastructure, then cars. What did we do? The reverse. Yes, ladies and gentlemen. We did the reverse. Next year, 50% of my models will be electric. Where is this charging infrastructure? Where is the clean energy? So you see, we are not talking about cars here. We are not talking about cars at all. Let me give you a few numbers. The number of fast chargers increased in 22 by 330,000 units, 90% in China. In Europe alone, by 2030, we will need 3.4 million of chargers. Currently, we have 340,000, which means 10%. Where is the charging network infrastructure? How is it going to be funded with a 5% interest rate in a world that is not based on free cash? Is there any free space in the Western world, starting with Europe, to increase taxes to fund that? I'm asking you the question, so that you can ask it to your governments. Who is going to pay? So you see, consistency, good sense is still missing in the Western world. So moving from here, we have another problem to solve. It's the problem of affordability. Assuming that we have a political vision of what a happy decarbonized society is, and there is consent to change behaviors. Assuming that we have the clean energy, that we have the right infrastructure, and that indeed you have the zero-emission vehicles from tank to wheel, you are left with what problem? The problem of affordability. Have you noticed that in France, the regulations on zero-emission zones, zero-emission areas, imposing on the people to leave the old cars outside of that area, even though they would be living inside of that area because those cars are not recent enough? You have seen all the local governments postponing the enforcement of those laws. Why? Because of revolt. So you leave your home in the morning, your 10 years old car, and you are told during the day you cannot go back home with your car, you leave it outside. Who is going to accept this? Isn't that the perfect example of dogmatism? How do you manage that? You don't. You postpone. You postpone. In the same way, where possibly Germany brought back the coal plants in winter because you could not explain to the citizens of Germany that they would not be heated during winter. Same way. So we need pragmatism. And now we have the problem of affordability, and we have our friends, our Chinese competitors, that are going to challenge us with a very different cost structure. So either we absorb the excess costs of electrification to protect affordability, that needs a lot of restructuring in the European automotive industry, and you have not seen 1% of that restructuring. Because everybody is faking that this is going to be okay. This is not going to last forever. Or we need to absorb 40% of additional cost. How do you absorb 40% of additional cost in 4 or 5 years? This is roughly 10% per year in an industry that is generating 2% productivity per year. So you multiply by 5-fold the pace of productivity. Do you think this is going to happen without restructuring? Is it fair to tell the customers, to tell the consumers, to tell the citizens, everything is going to be okay? Or are we faking? We have created this fantastic transformation without any impact study at the European Parliament level. When the first decision was made in October 2018, there was no impact study on the table. And we know perfectly well which are the states that push the most extreme positions at the European Parliament. So now we have 40% additional cost to absorb, and we are challenged by our Chinese competitors. They have done the job. So the question for Europe is very important. Is the only way to compete with our Chinese competitors to use the same cost structure? Or can we find another way to compete with them? That's the €1 million question. Because either we find another way to compete with them, or we conclude that the only way for us to compete with them is with the same cost structure. What does that mean for the European automotive industry? Why don't you ask that question to the European Commission? What does it mean to absorb 40% of additional electrification cost? What does it mean to multiply by 5 the pace of productivity to compete with Chinese car makers that have been preparing for this for the last 10 years in an open market? Do you remember that 20 years ago, people were looking for B-segment hatchbacks at less than 10,000 euros, 20 years ago. And there was harsh competition to make B-segment hatchbacks on sale at 10,000 euros. The outcome of that competition was that all the manufacturing of B-segment hatchback went LCC, low-cost country sourcing. 20 years later, we do it again with BEVs. So what does it mean? What does it mean to keep the market open, to compete with our Chinese friends on the fact that they have been preparing for this for 10 years, and now suddenly we need to absorb 40% of additional cost? And of course, it's going to be harsh. And if we don't make it, the only choice we have is to go LCC and do for the BEVs what we have done 20 years ago for the B-segment hatchback. So a lot of things to be done, and of course, you know all the headwinds in terms of raw materials. It's very funny because we see the spot prices of the raw materials on chemistries which are not stabilized. And we see Inflation Reduction Acts or new candidates for Inflation Reduction Acts on chemistries which are not stabilized. So if you move from lithium to sodium, what happens to the spot price? What happens to the investments in the lithium mines? There is one thing I shared with a political leader the other day. It was in the United States. I told him very respectfully, because the discussion was excellent. I told him, look, Mr. Governor, there is one thing that parliaments cannot overrule, is physics. Please accept that. Parliaments cannot overrule physics. Please accept that. Because if you don't accept that, you are going to make enormous mistakes, and we'll have to pay for that. Last topic to share with you, e-fuels. When we sell 85 million cars per year worldwide, and we say, okay, North America, Europe, and China, let's say a little bit more than 50 million on those 85. We try to push as hard as we can on the fact that on those 50 million plus cars on the total 85 worldwide market, X% of that will be BEV. And we try to rush to bring that number up as fast as we can. We are just forgetting one small topic in Brussels. Very small, tiny problem. That while we are doing that, and we should do it, no doubt, no discussion, as fast as we can, under the conditions that I have previously described to you, there is a small problem. Currently, on this planet, you have 1.3 billion cars which are ICE-based, and they are ICEs. 1.3 billion cars. So what do we do about it? Once we reach 85 million cars which are BEV, assuming, you need 16 years, 16 years to change the worldwide car park. Who is proposing a solution for that? Any NGO? Any European Commission? Any administration? So what do we do with 1.3 billion cars which are ICE-based? We keep on selling our 25% of BEVs and pray for the best? Even if we were selling 100% of BEVs on the 85 million worldwide market, we would need 16 years, 1/6, to clean the existing car park. So who is proposing a solution for that? Then e-fuels comes up and Germany raises the hand, everything stops, oops. Germany said no, oops. Now we listen. Great Germany. Now we listen. And you talk about e-fuels and say, well, perhaps it's carbon neutral, fantastic, possibly too expensive. You don't know. When you are deploying a technology which needs 10 or 20 years of lead time, in this crazy world, you assume that to deploy a 20 years lead time technology, you are going to have a steady environment that is going to allow you to keep your focus and get the job done on a 20 years lead time. You are assuming, point number one, that the world is steady. Nice joke. And point number two, you are assuming that there is no competing technology that will impact you laterally with a more efficient solution for the planet at a lower cost for the societies. So we are just betting that things will be steady for 20 years, that nobody will challenge this costly transformation with a better solution. Then somebody comes up and says, I have e-fuels. Perhaps it's carbon neutral. Perhaps not. Perhaps it's only 80%. So the dogmatists don't like it because it's still ICE-based. And perhaps it's too expensive. Then the politicians say, well, if it's too expensive, it's for the rich, the wealthy. So if it is only for the wealthy, we don't care. What if those guys find a way to break the paradigm? Who is going to pay for the enormous investments that the whole industry is doing right now? The billions and billions and billions of resources that we are pouring. Who is going to pay for it? If they were to break that paradigm. And by the way, if they don't break it, the paradigm, which I don't know, what is the solution for the 1.3 billion cars that are currently ICE based on the car park? So you see, the point I'm making here is very simple. If you don't have a strategic way of looking at such a complex issue, don't touch it. And this is perhaps the most important lesson to be learned, is that you cannot oversimplify things which are complex from a physics and chemistry perspective, and are very complex and deeply ingrained in the lifestyle of our societies. So what do we do? First, we keep in mind that regulators cannot go beyond physics. And we should systematically come back to the scientific world and try to understand what is science telling us. Secondly, the biggest mistake that has been done so far is not to be regulating on a technology-neutral approach. We need technology-neutral regulations, and as you know well, the current ones are not technology-neutral, which means the responsibility for the billions that we are spending is in the hands of those who decided a non-neutral technology regulation. The third one is that this is not about cars. This is about a lifestyle where cars are very much ingrained because for the last 100 years it was the best solution we could find. So it's about getting the consent of the population, of the people, on a new vision for the society so that they accept to change their lifestyle in the way that will complement the technology that will be carbon neutral. Then we need to make sure that we systematically fight against dogmatism and we systematically promote pragmatism. There is not such thing as saying, well, as long as there is some fossil in, I will push back. It doesn't make sense because it is counterproductive to fix global warming issue. If I just give you an example, which is absolutely obvious, is that if you look at the European car park, it's a 12-year-old car park. Any car that has more than 12 years of age is around 300 grams per kilometer of CO2 emissions. And the current equivalent products that all of us we are selling with mild hybrid are at 100. So each clunker that you take out of the car park and you replace it by a 100-gram product, you slash by threefold the emissions on a car that is affordable, that the middle classes can buy. So you sell a lot, and your impact on the planet is very significant because there is a volume impact. So why would you reject that? Because we are dogmatic? Well, I'm sorry. The seriousness of the problem does not allow us to be dogmatic. The seriousness of the problem that I committed to solve to my grandkids is imposing on us to be pragmatic. And that's important for us to understand. And to finish, I would say that this is not about cars. This is about freedom, and this is about lifestyle. Thank you.
It was a great speech. It's very difficult to add something. You posed a lot of very important questions. It was a little bit Just two questions. You told us about the freedom of mobility, which is very important, the decarbonization of cars, 2030, 75%. It's really great. You like speed, you like dynamic. We see that at Stellantis, at the group. And you showed us the problems of the energy transformation in our society, just in Germany. A few days ago, we had Shanghai, the Automotive show. We had the feeling that the world is changing a little bit if we look at Shanghai. What are your takeaways from Shanghai?
Well, it's quite simple. First, I was not there, but from the reports I got...
It's a pity.
No, I was not there, but the reports show clearly that, number one, Chinese consumers consider that the Chinese brands have a technological advantage on electrification. It's a fact. We just need to recognize that. They believe that the Chinese brands are on the edge of performance and technology when it relates to electric vehicles. It's a fact. The second thing is that there is huge room for startups to make proposals, which I think is going to be facing a severe headwind because of the interest rates, because of the funding seriousness that those startups are now going to start facing. But what we can take away is that in the Chinese markets, the Western car makers are going to have a hard time.
Yes.
This is one of the reasons why, leveraging the fact that we have not been making a good job in China as Stellantis, we have decided so far in the Therefore 2030 plan an asset-light strategy for China, because we see those two things. First one is that the Chinese car makers are very credible in the eyes of the Chinese consumers. It's a fact. I don't like it, but it's a fact. The second one is that we are facing very significant geopolitical risks on tensions between the Western world and China. Yes. And as we know well, when those tensions grow and they end up with cross-sanctions, the first victims of those sanctions are, generally speaking, the Western companies operating in the target country. So if the Western world starts to impose sanctions on China, China will do the same, but the first victims of the Western sanctions will be the Western companies operating in China. So for us, as we are a global company with a strong business footprint in Europe, North America, and we are the leaders in Latin America and on the podium of Africa and Middle East, it's for us a big risk to be very exposed to the Chinese market if we anticipate that there will be cross-sanctions. That's why I'm calling for de-escalation. I'm calling for wisdom between the Western world and China so that we can do our job, trade, and create a better world without being potentially the victims of those sanctions.
Yes, the French President Macron is a little bit balancing all these things, which is very important in Germany. We are sometimes confronting. That's not a good story. If you look at China, Shanghai, you mentioned the startups, the capital markets. You need, and the car industry need a lot of money to do all that innovations and all that trends you do. On the one hand, we see the American capital markets with stock market prices of Tesla, which is incredible. How do you feel the competition will be in the car industry in the next 10 years?
First, I'm very excited about the competition. We like racing, as you can see
here. I see.
We don't always win, but we like racing. So I feel very good about competition. I think it's going to be very harsh. I think what the societies and the European society has not seen yet are the consequences of that competition. I feel good about it because my team is ready for it. We have a very low break-even point. We never stop working on cost cutting, never, 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 because we want to keep our break-even point very low, because we are anticipating exactly what you say. We are anticipating the fact that the competition with our Chinese competitors is going to be very harsh. We anticipate that when we see that Tesla is dumping prices in a way that is destroying their profitability, welcome to my world. Welcome to my world. That's my world. So we love the competition. We love it. it's going to be very harsh. And the only thing that I'm sad about is that nobody is explaining to our people and to the citizens what it means. And when the European Union will start seeing the consequences of opening this Pandora box, I'm quite afraid that it's not going to be very pretty. But are we at Stellantis ready for the fight? Yes, sir. We are ready for the fight, and we are going to fight.
Yeah.
You can trust on that factor, and I feel good because I like racing, and my people like racing.
So it's great to have you here. It's great to have your feelings and your dynamics and seeing how you strong go on into the future. We need that because the Taiwanese are also, the Chinese are also very dynamic. So thank you very much for being our guest today and give you this splendid speech.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.